Hi, Dave Henson here, the slide presentation man. If you watched Saturday night's COVID briefing, you will have seen this slide come up on the screen during Sir Patrick Vallance's briefing. It's not the best slide in the world, is it? And in fact, Sir Patrick himself pointed out that it was produced by the NHS and not by the government. And he said himself that it was quite a complicated slide, which I think was kind of polite code for it's a bit crap, isn't it? Now, I must admit, I didn't really follow this slide when he was talking about it, maybe for obvious reasons, but I downloaded the PDF, which you can get from the gov.uk website, and had a good look at it and managed to get an understanding of what he was talking about. And I thought, well, it would be good to produce this in a way that works as a slide and gets the information across whilst he's actually presenting it rather than downloading it afterwards. So I took a good look at this and I've produced a better slide. But before we do that, let's go into what I think is wrong with this particular slide. So let's start off with the title, England New SPI-M Combined Projection Bed Usage. Does anyone know what SPI-M is? I do. I've looked it up, but I didn't know before what SPI-M stood for. Apparently it stands for the Scientific Pandemic Influenza Group on Modelling. Who knows what that means? Who really cares what that means? What we want to get is the minimum information rather than SPIM combined. I didn't understand what combined meant either. What's combined about it? Is it because they've combined two slides on one? I really don't know. So we can simplify the title, I think. Secondly, this bit here, this actually is the main message that the slide is trying to get across when all of the different peaks are being exceeded if we carry on as we are at the moment. But it's tucked away in a box, admittedly a highlighted box, but very small text at the top of the slide. And on the right we have England V beds. Now I couldn't remember what he meant by V beds, so I googled it and absolutely nothing came up. So I had to re-watch the briefing, and it means ventilator beds. Okay, so again, slight lack of communication on the slide itself. Then we have the legend. It appears twice, exactly the same legend for both of the two graphs. So there's no need for the legend to appear twice on the same slide. Then we have this x-axis at the bottom going from March to December. On the PDF, the numbers, as you can see, drop off onto the second line, and so does the word December. And you've got these dates all over the place, 23, 17, 1. I think they're 2 weeks apart, but it's not a very good x-axis scale to be using. Then you've got the NHS logo, bottom left. I think that was quite a good face saver for Sir Patrick Vallance to say that the slide was produced by the NHS. But does the NHS logo need to be there? Should it be tucked away so that it's not in the way? Well, I suppose it is down in that corner, but we'll look at a different way of doing that when I produce the slide. Then we have all this source material. Now don't get me wrong, I think that in some ways the complexity of this slide may be to some people quite reassuring. They may think, well, I don't understand it, but it looks really scientific, so it must be right. And the source information is quite important on the handout, but really on the slide, when it's on that small screen, even if it's blown up on your TV, you're not going to really see that source information, or indeed, you're not really going to read it. So I would take that off of the slide and leave it on the PDF. Then you've got this hands, face, space thing going on the slide. It's tucked away in the corner. Again, okay, it's an important message, but does it need to be on every single slide? In my view, the slide should just contain the information that you're trying to get across, the message you're trying to get across to your audience. And here you see this bunch of coloured words on the slide and arrows and lines and all sorts of things going on. And unless you take your time to read it, you're not going to understand it quickly by just seeing the slide on the screen. And then, as we've already said, you have two graphs on the one slide. The left-hand graph is for all acute beds. The right-hand graph is for ventilator beds only. And in fact, the trends are pretty much the same. So what I would do is I would remove the ventilator beds graph from the slide and maybe bring it up as a second slide just quickly to go through and say that, you know, the situation is pretty much the same regarding ventilator beds as it is for acute beds. And the final point is that everything on that slide appears on the slide at once. And The biggest thing I think you can do to improve this slide is to build the points up as you're talking about them. So I'm now going to show you how I've produced this slide to see whether it can be improved. So the first thing I've done is I've put the title at the top, just projected bed usage, 3 simple words, and then the subtitle, acute beds in England. And then for the second graph, which I'm not going to do, but if I was to do the second graph, it would say ventilator beds in England. And then the NHS logo I've tucked up in the top right hand corner out of the way. And what this means now is we've got all this white space underneath the title for our graph. And this is how I produced the graph. Very simple in terms of the X and Y axis. The X axis now goes from March to December. Each of the months is shaded so you can differentiate between the months. And on the left hand side, you've got the axis going from 0 to 40,000, and you've got 4 grid lines going across from 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 and 40,000. And that's the basis of the chart of the slide. So now let's go through and actually present this information. So the first thing we talk about is how bed usage went up at the beginning of lockdown and peaked round about early April. Then it fell back during spring and summer before rising again from mid-September and through October to the point where we are now. And if we carry on without any kind of action, bed usage will rise exponentially over the coming 4 or 5 weeks. The grey area shows the tolerance, 50% tolerance either side of the projected bed usage rise. And what this means is that by the time we get to around about the 20th of November, we will have exceeded the previous peak in April, as you can see from the yellow area. Then just a few days later, we will exceed all of the currently available beds round about the 23rd of November, as shown by the orange band. And then finally, round about the 4th of December, we will exceed the surge capacity and the capacity freed up by postponing some hospital services and operations. And it's at this point that the NHS will become overwhelmed. So that slide now covers the basic message that the government were trying to get across, that if we don't do anything, we will exceed the previous peak, we will exceed the capacity, and then we will exceed the surge capacity. And that graph, I think, shows it much better than the graph that the government used. Don't forget, as I said, your handout can be similar to this, but you can put all the source material back on if you want to. You can put more information on the handout because people have got time to take that away and read it and digest it at their leisure. But I think whilst you're presenting, keep the slides as simple as possible so that people understand them. Let me know what you think in the comments below.